Hi again. So I am just giving you some more information about elder abuse. And so if you were in class today, Friday, November 3rd, you recall that we did start this. So we're picking up where we left off, which for both classes, it should be slide 6. So the facts and figures, a lot of this data is coming from the CDC, and you'll see that some of this data does not correlate with what the authors of the textbook have said. So you will see that 1 in 10 elders who live at home, again, at home does not mean the same thing as a residential setting. So, in their respective home, 1 in 10 of them will experience some form of elder maltreatment. It could be self neglect, it could be neglect from someone else, abandonment, physical or sexual abuse, as well as psychological or emotional abuse, as well as financial exploitation or power of attorney abuse. So, a lot of really sad and unfortunate options. However, I do want to give you some more information regarding this chapter so you can see all of that there. This is coming straight from the CDC. You can pull that resource as well. And just know that from 2002 to 2016, we do see that there are over 600,000 elders who go to the emergency room for some type of treatment that is non fatal or from a non fatal injury, rather. So we could assume that's probably physical or sexual elder abuse. It's going to be a little bit harder to measure the extent at which elders experience psychological or emotional abuses. Um, so, according to the CDC, this is going to be different again than the textbook. They claim that from 2002 to 2016, elder males, were at a greater risk of experiencing both fatal and non fatal forms of elder maltreatment. And homicide rates did increase as well, unfortunately, um, both with a gun and without a gun. So you can see that 39% of those homicides completed by a gun or completed with a gun were done at the hands of an intimate partner, compared to 12% without a gun, but also committed at the hands of an intimate partner. And so, when looking at the motives for why this is happening, at least from that data, we see that the first one is some type of dispute, whether that's from an intimate relationship or within the family. We also have robberies and burglaries, and I would encourage you to think about why an elderly person living alone in particular might be at an increased risk of experiencing either burglary or robbery. The third one is stemming from an argument, and the fourth most common motive was due to some type of medically assisted, well, not medically, but some type of assisted suicide, usually when one of the individuals was sick or diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so, again, it's still illegal in our country, so that would still count as a homicide. I'm going to send you a link regarding the first case study, which was of Margaret Collins. This is really sad. Individuals in her residential facility took a video of her, and she was very fearful of, I guess, the sheets or the actual, what do you call it, like a cloak that they would wear. And they were recording her as an inside joke. They were scaring her, and then they were sharing it on Snapchat. So they were also violating her HIPAA rights, and I would encourage you to watch that video when I post it, even though it's sad. The next one comes from the textbook, which you don't have, unfortunately, and so that talks about power of attorney abuse. And there's a woman named Helen. She was 85, and her daughter became her power of attorney, and sadly, she sold her house out from underneath of her. There weren't many resources for Helen to, get any of that back, to figure out what to do. And so, unfortunately, she did not receive much help, and she passed away 6 weeks later. So, this is very sad. I think I mentioned it to you in class, but if any of you have ever watched the movie I Really Care, or maybe it's called I Care a Lot, either way, it kind of highlights some of those cases. All right, so let's look at the measurement and extent, which is going to be on slide 9. This is coming from Daigle and Muftick, that book I often reference. So they look at some studies coming from Adult Protective Services, which is the same thing as Child Protective Services, but of course for elders and adults. They look at some of the reports there, and they try and quantify certain cases. So what they find is they use the National Elder Abuse Incident Study, which last I can find was most recently done in 1996. So keep that in mind. They found that 62% of the individuals whose cases were reported to Adult Protective Services contain maltreatment by someone else. So the most common form reported, of course, to APS was not self-neglect. When we do survey estimates, there's the National Social Life, Health, and Aging Project, and this was most recently conducted in 2008. They had 3,000 respondents across the U.S., and you can see the data there. So most commonly, at least in that case, we see verbal maltreatment. So somebody insulting them, disrespecting them, harassing them verbally. There's also elder maltreatment in institutions. So if they're living in a residential care facility or a nursing home, as we might refer to them, if they have been a victim of abuse of any type or maltreatment, it is encouraged that they report to this program, and each state program should be receiving the complaints. Looking at some of the data regarding intimate partner violence among elderly females at the hands of their partner, we see that approximately 2% of females, so 2% of females over 55 experience intimate partner violence. And then the most common thing we see on this page, at least, is that 60% of the elders experienced some type of financial exploitation, whether it was completed or attempted. The good news is that most of them were not completed. So somebody caught on and helped them. Moving into the next slide, again, this is going to contradict what the CDC says. So we're probably looking at two different data sources. Okay, so they say that females are more likely than males to be a victim of maltreatment. They talk about how females are kind of socialized and supervised differently across the lifespan than males. Also, we know that the longevity of typical Americans for the lifespan is longer for females and shorter for males. So they'd be living longer, and also their spouses, if they are abusive, kind of have unlimited access to them at some point. It is more common for elderly individuals who are 80 years and older to be victims of maltreatment, more so than those who are 60 and above. And then, according to this source again, if they are white and elderly, they're more likely to be a victim. And I believe Diggle and Bufdick got this from Adult Protective Services records. When looking at characteristics of maltreatment, we see the most common form, which a lot of you got right on that Mentimeter quiz, so good job, is self-neglect, followed by caregiver or caretaker neglect, and then financial exploitation. According to a separate study, though, physical abuse is the second most common. So I really feel like there needs to be a more concerted effort to collect data on this population. Nonetheless, when any of this happens, aside from the caretaker abuse, or neglect rather, we see that it's most commonly perpetrated by somebody close to the victim. Sadly, it's usually done by a daughter who is under the age of 60. And the most common age range for them to be perpetrating this abuse is between 40 and 49 years of age. Okay, so here are some risk factors on the next slide, but again, this is just from the textbook. There are many others, so I would just encourage you to think about some of those. The CDC website has a lot of information, so maybe look at that. First is dependency theory, and so we kind of talked about this without specifically stating this name when we looked at child abuse. So we see that as people become more dependent on others, it can cause the person that they are dependent on to experience more stress. And not that it excuses it at all, but the stressors of taking care of someone on top of other life stressors might push someone into committing some type of maltreatment, whether it's physical, psychological, etc. Institutional abuse, according to the text, it's more common among nursing aides who work extremely long hours and make little money. So again, a lot of stress and not a lot of reward for that. Not the fault of the elders, but still worth acknowledging. And lastly, we have routine activities theory, which you should remember. I hope you did not forget that yet. So we know there's always a motivated offender, according to that theory, right? We don't have to explain why, they're just there. So, why would an elderly person be a more suitable target for that motivated person, right? Think about it. And then, in terms of lack of capable guardianship, one, they might live on their own and not have a guardian of any type, not even like a camera. But also, they might be in close proximity to motivated offenders who should be their capable guardian, like a loved one, but they instead are the offender. Okay, we're almost done. So some of the protective factors, according to the CDC, are ones that we have talked about. So the caretaker or loved one having emotional intelligence and being able to recognize they're stressed, they need to step away from it and come back. Also having social supports. So having a program maybe where the elderly person can get out of the house. Maybe it's community service. Maybe it's a volunteer program where they get to socialize with others. That's very helpful. And so is collective efficacy, which you also should know. Responses, legislation, there's the Older Americans Act of 1965. So this has been in existence for quite some time. They just mandate that states have policies in place to address elder maltreatment and abuse. And the Elder Justice Act that was established in 2010 has authorized over $400 million for 4 years of adult protective services. Also, it gives money to prevent abuse and financial means to support forensic centers that might test for different types of abuse among elders. Lastly, we have the criminal justice response. So we do have specialized prosecution units, just like we saw when we covered hate crime victimization, only instead of it being detectives, now we're looking at prosecutors. There's also the Northeast Healthcare Law Enforcement Association, which has its own database tracking perpetrators of elder abuse. So this was a very short tidbit on elder abuse. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to seek out resources or to email me for more resources, and we can have future conversations if you would like as well. But that is all I have for you now. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you soon. Bye.